Hey everybody, Steph here. In this video, we're going to learn the SQL language. This is the coding language of databases. And what am I going to do? Instead of breaking it up into all kinds of little parts, I'm going to just try to do it in one bigger video. This is something that I haven't done in a long time, and I figured, we'll see how people react to it. And the other unconventional thing I'm going to do is we're going to actually build the course. We're actually going to do the course using the W3 Schools website. There's a whole bunch of reasons for it, which I'll get into pretty soon. And that's about it. So I'm recording this on Windows 10 just because most people use Windows these days. I use both Mac and Windows, so it doesn't really matter which computer you use. All I suggest is that you do go to the w3schools.com/SQL so you can follow along. What I'm going to do is actually go through their tutorial. I'm going to fill in a lot of blanks here and there though, and I'm going to translate a lot of what they do here from nerd to non-nerd. W3 Schools is a great site if you know what you're doing and you want to build your knowledge. That's why I always emphasize in all my videos that the key is the basics. If you know the basics, then you can learn all kinds of other stuff quite easily. So W3 Schools has all kinds of good material here and tools in here to actually make testing the code pretty easy. So, if you're a total beginner, I would say you get my book or you do my interactive web developer course, and then you can come to the W3 Schools and learn different things or maybe go deeper into different subjects. Anyway, off on a tangent. So SQL is the language of relational databases. So let me step back for a little bit. So a database is simply an app that is used to store a lot of data. And data is another word, it's a nerd word for information. So a database is a base of information. Databases are apps, and the apps have all kinds of functionality built into them to make storing and retrieving and managing large chunks of information easy. You need these type of apps, these database apps, trust me, when you start building up a good amount of information. So let's say you have a online shopping cart where you're going to need to keep track of all your clients, their client shipping addresses, the orders that they've purchased, the products in your catalog. Now you could do this manually using flat files, or maybe if you do a little PHP, you could store stuff in text files and use PHP's text file capabilities to extract information. But that would be just silly, because one of the advantages of using a database is that they got all these tools built into them to make all this really easy. So there are several types of databases out there. There is the three that I'm aware of anyway are the SQL database, which we're going to be spending all our time on, the flat file database, which are just text files, and then the object database. An object database is a database that works with object-oriented code. So if you've done my JavaScript course where I've introduced you to some basic object-oriented concepts, that's where object databases come in. And there are other types of databases. Now, you can think of the types of databases like there are types of automobiles. You have sports cars, you have convertibles, you have minivans, you have trucks. Each type of database has their role, where they're strong, where they're strong, where they're weak. These days, if you're going to get into web development or any type of development really, there's a 99% chance you will be using SQL-based databases rather than object databases or flat file databases, which are the other two types that I talked about, and there are other types. Most of the time, you're using SQL databases. SQL is short for Structured Query Language, and it's, let's break down that word. Structured, it's querying, it's language that's structured, and it's for querying. A query is just a nerd word, a fancy word for ask questions. So it's a structured language for asking questions. Structured query language. It's a coding language, and or you can reverse it. So you got SQL, structured query language. You could go, it's a language for querying, and it's structured. And so what are you querying? You're asking questions, you're communicating with a database app. but you're not communicating with all types of databases. The SQL language was invented with the SQL databases. Another word for an SQL database is a relational database, and I'll explain to you as we get further into this video why is it called a relational database. So there are several vendors out there, several companies out there that produce or build SQL databases. And if you look at the W3 School sites, it lists them right here at the top. So we have MySQL, which is probably the most popular, and SQL Server from Microsoft, and Access, which is, it's kind of an SQL Server, Oracle, Sybase, DB2, PostgreSQL. There are others. And again, you're going to get the people who love Oracle are going to say MySQL is garbage, and vice versa, just like with programming languages, just like with cars. I happen to like Audis, my friend loves BMWs, and we won't agree. So what we're going to be learning is SQL, which is a universal language of SQL databases. They call it the ANSI language. So we'll get into it later. You can forget about that for now. So we're going to learn the basics. We're going to learn how SQL databases work and so on. So let me just get into the intro here. So let's just read off some of these things, and I'm going to fill in the blanks, translate from nerd to non-nerd. So SQL stands for Structured Query Language. We discussed that. And the language allows you to access databases. SQL is ANSI, American National Standard Institute standard. So it means it's a standard language, but all SQL databases support the SQL ANSI standard. But in addition to that, Microsoft will have their own proprietary versions of SQL functions and stuff that you can do, and all the vendors do that, whether it be MySQL, Oracle, Sybase, whatever. So, but what we're going to concentrate on in this course, this video, is the basic SQL syntax, the basic stuff, because it's universal. And once you got the basics, by the way, 95% of your SQL work will be with these basics. So let's see what else. What can SQL do? Let's see, it's all nerd here. Basically, you can use SQL to create databases within a database, add tables. We'll discuss what tables are soon. Delete records, add records, all kinds of stuff. It's very, very, very powerful. So let me scroll down. So if you look at websites like YouTube, like Facebook, like Twitter, Studio Web, Killer Sites, any WordPress blog, behind the scenes, you have a database. And in all those cases, you have an SQL database powering everything, storing all the information. So it's quite useful. So let's, so they're jumping here into, database tables. Okay, so an SQL database, another word for SQL database, another way you call it relational databases. And the way relational databases basically work is you put all the information into tables. Think of an HTML table. So if you look on this page here, you see a table right here, right? Now tables have rows from left to right, and they have columns up and down. And each column represents a different piece of information. So this table is a customer table, right? Well, it says right here, customer table. And it tracks all the information about customers that you would want. So that's the customer ID. You always have to give your records in your database table. This is a record. This is a record. This is a record. Each client is a different record, a new recording, a new record. So I hope you understand that. Anyway, so when you are building your database tables, because you build these, you design these as a coder, you have to think about all the information you want to track. So let's say you have an online store and you're going to have a table on your clients, your customers. So you have, each customer has to have an ID that has to be unique. There can't be two customers with the ID of two, because that, the ID of one, because that would cause troubles, trust me. So the ID, you have to have what they call a unique ID in every table to identify each record, each row. Each row is a record, each row is a record. So you have customer ID, the customer name, the contact name, the address, city, postal code, country. Now, what you put in the table is up to you, and every business will have different things they want to track. So let me make an analogy. So I'm opened up here Google Sheets. It's a spreadsheet. And spreadsheets kind of look like database tables because you got columns, right? You got rows. And the big difference is that with spreadsheets, the whole point of spreadsheet is to take information, hold lots of information to manipulate, to create graphs, to create reports. Some people use them as databases too, but they don't have nearly the power of a proper database app to manage huge amounts of information. Think about if you had like, millions and millions of records and so on. It could get pretty complex. So I'm just using the spreadsheet here to help you understand how it goes. So if I was a nerd, well, I am a nerd, but let's say I had a job where I wanted to create an online store. So I had to track orders, I had to have a client table, and I had a whole bunch of other tables probably. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to name this sheet. I'm just going to call it client. I'm going to call it store. Pretend this whole thing is like my database, and each sheet, I don't know if you're familiar with Excel, represents a new table. So this table, I'm going to call it, I should be able to rename this. Yeah, rename this. I'm going to call it clients. So it'd be like my clients table. And I have another table here. I'm going to call it, where's rename? I'm going to call it products. So I would have all my products tables, right? That'd be cool. Let's say I want another a database table. This could be a good way to, using a spreadsheet like this, just to figure out what you want in your database table. So I'm going to rename this. You got client, products, you got orders, right? You got orders. And I'm going to add another one. This is going to freak you out, and I'll explain to you why I'm doing this later on. And you got rename. I'm going to call it order details. Now, you notice the names I chose for each of these tables, each of these database tables. Now, to be clear, I'm just using Excel to demonstrate concepts here. Excel is not a database, but they do have rows left to right, and they do have columns, so it's a nice way for me to sort of demonstrate the basic principles. We're going to get back to the W3C, because then we can actually interact with the database table using real commands. So if we, you look at this first sheet here, we'll call it our database table. It's called the clients. Now in the clients I have the ID, cuss name, cuss last name, cuss phone, cuss address. Now I use cuss because I was kind of lazy, but it's kind of clear as customer. But if I was designing a system for long term, I would give a proper name. I would call them customer. And you notice I have no spaces in there. You should have no spaces, just like naming variables and stuff if you're doing PHP or JavaScript. And you notice how the names tell you something about the information in the column, right? This column, hey, it's the customer's name. I don't go CN. I don't name it CN or call it column A. I give it a name so that it makes sense to me when I'm looking back at it 6 months from now, or I'm writing code, my PHP code, to interact with this table. It'll be easy for me to figure out what this column is about. And even when it comes down to the table name, I call it clients, right? It's a table where I'm keeping track of all my clients. So you have a client ID 1, this is client information. So I'm just going to copy this just so it's clear. So let's say I added a new client, woohoo, new client buys. Well, it's not going to be Steph again, but we're going to call it Nick. Nick comes in and buys a product. And it's not Mishchuck, of course, so we'll call him Nick Yahoo. He buys, and he's got a different phone number, whatever. And my address is, Nick's address, rather, is the South Pole. There we go. So you get the idea. So as clients come in, you would add them in your client table, and you have all these records. And each client will have a unique ID, the CUS ID. Again, like I said, if I was really doing this real, it would be customer ID. It's good to have long names for your column names, for your database names. It just makes it easier for you to code, just like when you're writing your code in JavaScript or PHP or whatever language. So here's that table. So the next table will be the products table. So you got to have products. So I'm going to say that what are you going to, you're going to need a product ID, right? So go to a product ID. That's cool. Or like this, that's cool. And then what else you're going to have? You're going to have a product name. So I'm using camel case here. If you remember camel case from the programming, up and down like a camel's hump, right? Product name. Or I'm going to have, what else am I going to have? A product, so you could do underscore like this. That would be cool, underscore. Or you can do dash. I'm just be consistent. Product name, product What else do we have? Product logo price. What else do we want? We want product. I don't know. Weight. Let's say we're shipping bananas or something. I don't know. So that's it. So I'll just leave it at like that for now. See, when you're doing apps for clients, they're going to tell you what they're going to need to track about their products if you're setting up like an online store for them. So there you go. Site is centered. So now you got your product. So you know what? I need a product ID. So in a database, you have something called the unique key. Now it's usually the ID of every of the record in the table. So let me go back to this clients table. You know, it's a customer ID. This is always going to be unique. Each value in here in each of these rows are unique. You'll never have another number 4 in this row here. You'll never have another number 6. That way you can uniquely identify, in this case, the clients in the table. So yeah, so that's kind of cool. That's kind of a standard thing. Now databases actually have tools and capabilities built into them, lots of them, to make your life easier. One of the things they have the ability for you to set a column to say that, make sure this is called the auto increment column. So it will automatically generate these numbers for you. So anyway, keep that in mind. A lot to take in, I know, but this is the nature of this particular video. So I'm just going to do it like this. This is an old spreadsheet trick. You take two numbers like this, and then you highlight them, you get the little square, and you drag, and then your spreadsheet does that for you. Kind of cool. So we're going to have a product name. We're going to go potatoes. Potatoes. Product price, we'll say it's a dollar, and we're going to say product weight 1 pound, right? So that's not bad. So yeah, so we go next product. We're going to go tomatoes, potatoes, and product price. We say it's $1.25, and we'll say it's for 1 lb. Anyway, and then what else could we have? We'll have Xboxes. Product price, we'll say it's $200, and it weighs 10 lbs. So there you go. So we got our product table building up. Now, when you're building your tables, you wouldn't fill in this data like this. I'm just doing this to demonstrate. You would use code later on, SQL code combined probably with PHP or Java or Python or whatever coding language, programming language you want to use to fill in this data most of the time. It depends. Clients might give you a whole bunch of data in a file, and you have to import it using SQL. But anyway, I'm just putting in some data so you can get an idea of how it works. So that's kind of cool. So you get your product, you got a product ID, the name, the price, the weight. That's cool. We got this table here with the clients, got the client names. Now, how about the orders? You got an order. So we're going to have order ID. And we're going to have order date, I guess, right? We have the order date. And we have order shipping address. You never know. And this is a key concept in databases I'm about to teach you right here. We drum roll. And it's going to be called customer ID. Now, why did I drum roll customer ID? Because your customers are stored in the client table. You know, we should call this table customer, right? Because you can't have client and we have customer. We want to keep everything consistent, right? So I'm dumb. So we're going to go customer table. So there we go, customers. See, because we have customer table, customer column ID, column name, customer name, last name, so on. So in our order page, we have a customer ID. Now, remember I talked about SQL databases are called relational databases. Now, think of the word relational. It's about relationships, like brother, sister, aunts, cousins, dogs, cats, and not dogs, cats, but you get the idea. There's a relational database holds all its data in tables, as we're kind of building here in the spreadsheet, just as an example. You would actually build these tables in a real database app, which we're going to do soon. Yeah, so and you have all these tables. So, you know, we had a customer table, our products table, our orders table, and so on. So one of the things that you do with an SQL database, with a relational database, is that you create connections. You create relationships between one table and the other. See, why don't you put your customers and their orders all in one table? Because it would be a mess. It would be a mess. You don't want to do that. That would be like putting your underwear in your socks drawer. You don't want to put your underwear in your socks drawer, because when you put your underwear and your socks mixed together, your socks are going to disappear in your underwear. It's going to be hard to find any of your socks. And it's the same thing with your database tables. When you're creating your database tables for your database, you want to conceptualize, you want to think about how you organize your data. So it's very common you would have if you're doing an online store, you would have a customers table, and then you would have an orders table, and then you would have a products table, and so on and so forth. So the next step is to create a relationship between tables. You don't always have a relationship between tables, but a lot of times you do. So for instance, we have our orders, and customers place orders. So how do you associate a particular order? Here's the order, right? So we have order, let me just let's do what we do here just for the sake of making it look clear and clean. So we're going to have our order IDs here. Cool. And let me just do this. Boom. So imagine there was date and shipping address and so on. So how do you connect the order from the orders table with the customer who buys? You do it through the customer ID, the customer ID. So this customer ID is the same as the customer ID in this table. So in your code, when a new order would come in, you would add a new order entry here. You say order date today. Well, you would put the date today. So I don't know, August 3rd. And then you would have a shipping address, because who knows, maybe you have a client, they have an address, but they may have a separate shipping address. So I would always put the shipping address in there. But you know what? Your client may say to you, no, we don't need that. That's not how we operate in our business. So you got to be understanding when you're designing database tables, you're going to be adapting to what your client tells you. So there's this period where you sit down with the client, you interview them, and you find out what they need, yada, 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 and then you design your tables like I'm doing here. Anyway, so you put the shipping address if there is, and then you put the client ID. So in code, whether it be your PHP code or your Java code, your Python code, your Ruby code, or whatever, and combine with SQL, by the way, PHP, Python, Ruby, when they're working with databases or relational databases, when they're working with SQL databases, they're always interacting with the SQL language, right? So you have your PHP that's doing SQL, and then the SQL communicates with the database. I hope that makes sense. We'll be demoing that at some point in the future. So so you want to basically tag this particular order number one. We know it's order number one because order ID number one. And we want to tag it with a customer, meaning we want to say which customer bought order number one. So we go to our customers, and strangely, we'll say it's customer number two. So we just put in here order number one, customer number two bought order number one. So imagine you got thousands of orders, right? You got thousands of orders, and you want to know how many orders did customer ID bought. Did customer number two bought with the ID of number two. Then you can go to your orders table and just do some SQL and say, show me which orders did customer with the ID of two bought. And that kind of stuff. So this is just a taste. So you've learned about building tables, you learned about the columns and rows. You know that every time you got a new row, that's a new record, it's a new piece of information. You learned about having unique IDs in the table. They call them unique keys, like a key, a unique key, the key to the table. Meaning this can't be reproduced. You only, an order ID in the orders table, you only have an order ID number two once, right? Because then you can have all kinds of problems. Like a unique address on the street, it's like your building's address. You don't have the 33 Catherine Street twice on Catherine Street because people won't know where to send the mail. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, but other records, you can have duplicates because, your customer with the ID of two may place many orders. Well, we hope they do, right? So, and you go back, and the last thing we learned is that you have what they call these relationships created between tables, and you do that by putting keys from one table into the next table. So let me give you that example is our unique key in this table, of course, is the customer ID, right? And we know that customer with the ID of number two is this guy here, Nick. And in our orders table, we say the customer with the ID of 2 bought this order, right? So it's unique. So now we can do all kinds of crazy cool operations using the power of SQL to pull out all kinds of data about customer with the ID of 2. Okay, I've been talking for a long time. I think I'm going to take a break right now. I may come back in this video, or I may do a part 2. I'm not sure. I know I said before I was going to try and do it all in one video, but my coffee is nearly run out, so forget about it. It's not going to happen.